Well, hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday, and thank you so much for taking the time to join in this little study, and pray that you will be blessed through it today. So we have moved ahead to chapter 8 of the book of Daniel, and this is interesting in many ways, and we have many more questions and we're going to find answers for. But I'm hoping in the midst of all of this to show you a few things from the what the Hebrew language can share in some of the words that maybe were lost in translation. So that's kind of where we're headed today. So as you can see on your screen, we are reading from the JPS or Jewish publication of Daniel, and it starts out in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. A vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. So just interesting, as I'm reading this, it obviously sounds a little rough. It sounds, like it repeats itself a little bit. So we're going to see that also come on when we look at verse 2. And Daniel says, And I saw in the vision, now it was so that when I saw, notice the repetition of what he saw, I was in Shushan, the castle, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision, and I was by the stream Ulai. So again, notice the repetition of what he saw. And of course, sometimes in English, we just pass over that. But what I am somewhat intrigued by is noticing these in a way that comes from studying the language of the Hebrew and Aramaic to pay more attention to these uh, kind of rough parts in English and kind of realize that, okay, the translators, if they had that hard of a time translating it into English and making the English sound smooth. What was it about the difficulty they had? What may we notice in the original language that they struggled with? So, in the Hebrew study, this is called a remez. It is a little quickening in your spirit of something that just seems like, okay, this sounds strange, or it sounds rough, or it doesn't flow smoothly, or this word jumps out at me and has a meaning I don't understand. And the goal here is not to just jump over it and keep reading, but is to see if there's any meaning that's deeper than what they were able to um, share within the confines, restrictions of English and of the translators of having to keep something readable and accessible. And so that's where the study takes us. So we notice also, and mentioned last week, that chapter 8 takes us back to Hebrew, which of course gives us many more resources to study from. There's a greater volume of um, information available in Hebrew than there is in Aramaic. And of course, the big question that no one can answer is, well, why the switch? You know, why did Daniel start out in Hebrew, go to Aramaic, and now when we get to verse 8, it switches back to Hebrew again? This has intrigued Bible scholars forever, and no one has an explanation for it because it's written thousands of years ago, and whatever happened, happened, and we don't understand the premise behind it. But what we do uh, know today, and what we can take away, is just to accept it as it is and look at what can this tell us? What can we learn from this switch? And see if there's any clues that come out. And so the first one is about the I saw. And of course, that stands out to the Jewish sages too. And let's read their comment on it before we go into the words themselves. And so the sage is saying here, and I saw. This verse is made difficult by the repetition of the phrase. It seems that it's best to regard this passage between the first and the second in the vision. And again, it's just very strange. What I take away from it is that this vision was very um, troubling to Daniel, and he was struggling to describe, first of all, what was happening. And in visions like this, it seems that he was not sure his place in it. And I say that as being, was he sleeping and was it a dream? We most of us can identify with that. Or was he awake and he had a vision? And I think this is more of the latter, where he didn't quite know where he was. We would sometimes use the term he's in an altered state of reality. Can you imagine what it would be like to be going about your business and all of a sudden you're seeing things in a different way? Your vision has changed. You're seeing in a different realm. None of the scenery around you looks the same. You pinch yourself and you say, "Oh, where am I? What's going on?" Your heart is racing wildly. You're just wondering, I don't know if they had um, hallucinogenic drugs back then, but we would say today something I ate something bad, or I was given something slipped in my food or in my drink or something, that suddenly I'm going through this. Um, all these things are possible of what Daniel was experiencing. And I look at that as maybe a reasoning as to why he is speaking the way he did. So he's trying to describe where he's at. And because why would anybody care what he was, where he was? The commentators find it hard to explain. Was he in Sushan and then suddenly was in the castle? Was this a long distance away and suddenly he found himself transported to this place? This is, I guess, where it gets very interesting as to how much of reality did he see? Had he seen the castle in Shushan before? And wherever he was having this vision, it was a replica and he saw it? Or was it that he felt like he was transported to be there, even though he knew that he was not in that place? And so all of these fascinating things happen. And he even talks about a stream. He was by the stream Ulai. I wish that we had a better way to relate to this. Why was he sharing this? You know, why didn't he just say, I have this vision? Why was it so necessary to know where he was? Um, Good questions. All we can do is come up with just some of our own reasoning to help us put it in perspective. I think he was just so shocked by everything that was happening that there were so many strange things that he saw in this vision, but he did relate to a few familiar things. And so he mentioned the familiar things, just trying to reorient himself and bring some understanding of what was going on here before he goes into the rest of this vision. So from this, I want to take a look at the uh, Hebrew itself because we have more resources now, and so it's really fun to go back here, and you can see how rough the sentence structure is. It talks about the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, so it's understood that from what we read in the previous chapter, chapter 7, until what happens here in chapter 8, has been a 3-year time period. So again, we sometimes get the impression that something is happening every minute, every hour of the day with these prophets, that they're just walking in a spiritual realm the whole time. But here it seems Daniel had a 3-year break, from his previous visions and interactions that now 3 years have passed, and then this vision comes to him. And again, why God does that, we do not know. But 3 years have passed, and so it says the vision appeared to him, and here's the words that they struggle to translate. And Vaere, I saw, Bechezot in the vision, And so he was in Shushan in the citadel. Here it's translated as citadel. It's translated as castle in the other English version. And it talks about, again, relaying this vision. So again, he's just so overwhelmed. But what I notice here is he talks about this river. And from the Hebrew, I'm noticing that this is not the normal word for river. If you look anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible, there will be a different word that's translated as river. This is the word uval or ubal. So we want to open this up and say, well, what's so different about this word? Why did Daniel choose this word? Of course, it's translated from river, has a sense that it's a stream. Okay, we have different words for stream and river. But what's interesting is this word is only used 3 times in the whole Bible, and it's used here in Daniel chapter 8. So this causes our spiritual antennas to go up here a little bit and say, well, what's so significant about this? Why did Daniel mention it in the beginning? So we see this not a lot in the Brown Driver Briggs, but it comes from the root word of yaval, which means to bring or carry along, has the word of a not a maybe not a natural river, but something that's bringing life-giving properties. It's maybe a conduit, and it even has a spiritual essence to it that symbolizes the flow of blessings and sustenance. It's a metaphor for spiritual nourishment and continual provision in God's grace. I find that a new way to look at this. And we'll just unpack this word Yabal one more time. And this it's more of a conduit. So was Daniel really seeing a real river, or was he seeing spiritual things flowing to him? Was he seeing something in a spiritual realm that was coming his way? And because nowhere else in Hebrew is this translated as river. So I find that very, very interesting. And we're going back one word, and of course, the name of this river, Ulai, um, we're not familiar with it. We don't know where it is today. Uh, does the Hebrew unpacking give us any indication? Again, we see it's only used twice in the Bible, and it's both times in chapter 8. And of course, the translators use words of perhaps, maybe, possibly. And so it's not even a real name of a river that they can tell. It has the idea of perhaps or uncertain. So was Daniel in putting these two thoughts together of a conduit or a stream of spirituality flowing. And he's saying, perhaps this is a spiritual experience. Perhaps this is coming from God. Perhaps all of this that's flowing my way is is from God. So he's not even really sure yet what's happening. And I can understand that, when you first have we'll say we can equate to having a dream or a nightmare or premonition or something. You say, is this coming from God, or is this, from my own self? Is from sources I can't identify? And so you find this interesting that the English translators will put it into a river and name the river when there's a deeper meaning behind it. It's a conduit of uncertainty. It's things that are flowing that and it's even this word hayati, uh, they translate it as was, but it's more of this is coming to pass, this is existing. He's saying I'm in this place, I'm feeling this, I'm experiencing this, and it's upon me. The word all can mean by, but it also can mean many other things, upon, beyond. Many different translations or uses of this preposition, al. So he's feeling this rush of vision coming through him, like overflowing of uncertainty and not knowing where it's coming from. So again, very interesting to unpack this. And then comes the fun part. He says he lifted up his eyes. we're going to go back to the sage's comments here. Um, I lifted up my eyes, and behold, there stood before, he's calling it here a stream, but it's again the same word of uncertainty. Um, and so he's uncertain, and there's a ram. And so very, very interesting here. Um, and is this ram a symbol of strength? Of course, that's what the um, commentators say, because it's very uncertain to him what he's seeing. And he's saying this ram had two horns. The two horns were high, but the other one was higher than the other, so they weren't even pair. And the higher came up last. So does that mean that he saw them growing before his eyes, and that one happened to grow faster than the other? And then he saw the ram pushing westward, and obviously it was strong and no other beast could stand before it. And then as he was considering this, this beast was very he uses the words, it magnified himself. It was very boastful, very self promoting. And then he saw this other goat, a male goat, he goat, come, and this had a conspicuous horn between its eyes. So again, we know that as we read this, we form a word picture in our mind. And I thought it'd be fun to see what others had thought. And of course, there's no shortage of imagery available of people who have read this over not even modern times, but even over the centuries, and come up with imagery. And so here we see the two goats. One is a sheep. This one here on the top image shows a single horn out of the middle. It described that one horn was bigger than the other, which again they try to um, come up with that. The next image that we're going to see shows this goat with the horn in the middle, but then other horns sprout out among it. And then this one strange one comes out of the side of it, but then we're going to see that it gets broken off, and one of them, the sheep or the ram here, prevails. So it's again very, very striking, the imagery there. And there's obviously a fight that goes on between these two. And we'll go back to the Hebrew wording here because it just makes it a little bit better sentence structure to follow. And he says, as he was considering this he goat that came over the face of the whole earth. So in his mind, these were not normal sized animals. They were much bigger and just huge in his dream. And as it's running, it didn't touch the ground. It's floating over the ground, which is also incredible. And this goat had a horn between its eyes. And so it's it's just really cool to think of this. What would we think if we had a dream like this? And just to remember it um, is one thing. So he saw the ram that had two horns and the other one, and suddenly they're in this match, and we know that sheep and rams will run into each other and butt each other with their horns. And then we get to verse 7. It says, I saw him come close to the ram. And then it uses a word that's, of course, I had to look up because it makes no sense to me. He was moved with choler against him. So, in order to find out what that really means, we'll look down here at the uh, comments, and he says this is literal meaning is to embitter himself. So why did he choose this word? Why was this goat so um, incensed, I guess is another word, uh, and had all this rage in himself towards this other goat in such a way that it was noticeable? I mean, we've seen animals fighting with each other, and but yet this word is moved with rage. It was just a different level of intensity of anger. And so this word that's translated as choler here is translated in a sentence that he was moved with rage. So let's pick this apart here. And as the Hebrew sage says, it comes from the word marar, which means to make bitter. One other term I remember seeing is when Moses was with the children of Israel in the wilderness and they came upon this pool of water that they were going to thought they were going to drink from, and they tasted it and it was bitter, and God performed the miracle of telling Moses what kind of items of sticks and branches to throw in, and caused the miracle to make the water turn from being bitter into being sweet. And that location is called Marar. So what's going on with this mood that's coming over this animal that is so filled with bitterness, so filled with marar, that it's not just mad. It's mad in a sense that's very challenging for us to even comprehend, to think of words to explain it. Um, I think I'm going to leave it at that because I don't know how to take it any deeper. There's a rage, there's a bitterness, and bitterness normally doesn't come from external circumstances of things that are happening to you. It strikes me as more of a condition of the heart, of having circumstances that embitter you, that cause you maybe not a physical anguish, but more of a mental anguish. And it's interesting that Daniel can identify this in this animal as a motivation um, for the violence that occurs here, for the attack. Um, Very challenging to try to comprehend that. And so he was moved with this deep bitterness, and there's this uh, fighting that goes on between them. And they're pushing each other back and forth. And then we get to verse 9, and it talks about this beauteous land. And of course, that's a word that's very strange too. We don't use any words like that. And so, uh, how does that play in to this? And as he's going on, um, the sages here, as we look at this word in verse 9, this translation calls it the glorious land, and it's called Has-Savi, and it's imagery of beauty, but it really ties back to the word for a gazelle. And all of us in some nature preserve or somewhere have seen these beautiful gazelles or similar type deer that are very common everywhere but the United States, and just look at them and say, oh, it's so beautiful. And interesting that this word is being used as a root word to describe something that isn't a deer, something that the sages say is describing the land of Israel. And I think that's where we're going to stop today with the end of verse 9. There's so much we can unpack here as to try to understand what Daniel is going through. What is he seeing? Trying to make reference to, is this, a current event, a future event that's soon to happen with him, or is it something that's going to happen further on down the line in time? And that is where we'll pick up next week. So God bless you all. Thanks again for listening, and hope to see you next time. Bye bye.